Chapter 9, Christiana's Story. I slept and dreamed again of Christiana, Christian's wife. Behold, she sat alone, remembering the brinish tears of her husband, and how she did harden her heart against all his entreaties to go with him to the celestial city. And now she was regretting it, for she had lost her dearest friend, and the loving bond between them had been broken. She knew full well it was for the love that he had to his prince that he ventured as he did. While thus she mused, there came a knocking at the door. "If you come in God's name, enter," she said. It was a stranger who appeared before her. "My name," he said, "is Secret. I live with those on high, and I bring this letter to you from your husband's prince." She opened it with trembling hands. It smelt of the best perfume, and was written in letters of gold. It was an invitation to do what Christian himself had done, to make that dangerous journey, both she and her 4 sons. It was what she believed she ought to do. So as soon as her visitor had gone, she rose and packed her bags. 2 of her neighbors, when they saw it, were quite stunned. One, whose name was Timorous, said, "Oh, the madness that's possessed you! If your husband, being a man, was so hard put to it, what can you, a poor woman, do?" But young Mercy, for she was but young, offered to go with Christiana, at which she did rejoice. "For the prince," she said, "who has sent for me, is one that delights in mercy." Presently, in good weather, they started out, 2 women and 4 boys, to find the wicket gate. The boys, who were called Matthew, Samuel, Joseph, and James, went on ahead. The road led them past a castle wall, and on the other side of the wall was a garden, and some of the fruit trees grew over the wall. So Christiana's boys, as boys are apt to do, did pluck the fruit and began to eat. Their mother chided them, but if she had known to whom the fruit belonged, she would have been ready to die of fright. Even now, from beyond the wall, a hideous barking could be heard. "Why do they keep such a filthy cur?" cried Mercy, much affrighted. "They ought to hang it," said the boys, but everybody greatly feared that it would jump into the road and do to them what its doggish nature prompted it to do. They tried to hurry on, only to find their way was blocked by 2 ill-favored men. "Stand back!" the woman cried, covering their faces with their shawls and seeking to avoid a scuffle. "We are in haste!" But the ruffians regarded not in their words, and began to lay their brutal hands on them. "Murder!" they shrieked. "Murder!" Luckily, their cries were heard by the keeper of the gate, Goodwill by name, as we recall, who hastened to the rescue, and the ruffians escaped over the wall. "That is Beelzebub's castle," said their rescuer. "He is the owner of the dog, which was frightened many an honest pilgrim, and these men are his minions. But why did you not ask for a guide?" "Alas," said Christiana, "who could have thought that near your wicket gate there lurked such naughty ones?" But a remedy was soon to hand, for when they reached the house of the interpreter, he summoned a Mr. Greatheart, a manservant of his, and ordered him from that day forth to be their guardian and guide them on their way. Next morning they wore off again, and shortly reached the place where Christian fought with the foul fiend Napoleon. "Whereabouts was the battle? For the valley is large," asked one of the boys. "They fought in this narrow passage," said Mr. Greatheart. "It's the most dangerous place in all these parts." Then he called to Christiana. "Here are some of the shivers of Apollyon's darts, and here to this day upon these stones is some of your husband's blood, to prove how well he played the man." So they came to that evil-haunted place, the valley of the shadow of death. Many have spoken of it, but none can tell what the valley is like until they come to it themselves. And Mr. Greatheart told of a Mr. Fearing, who came on a pilgrimage with him once. When we came to the entrance of this valley, he said, I thought I should have lost my man. He was so terrified. Oh, the hobgoblins will have me! The hobgoblins will have me! He cried. But they went through it better than Mr. Fearing, and better far than Christian did, because they had the daylight, and Mr. Greatheart was their guide. Even so, they heard a lot of groaning, as of dead men, which caused the boys to quake, and caused the women to look pale and wan. Then a shadowy shape appeared, and Joseph cried, Mother, what is it? An ugly thing, child, she said, an ugly thing. And now I see what your poor father has gone through. He went here all alone by night, and with these foul fiends busy all around him. Next, they came to Vanity Fair and wondered fearfully how they'd be received. They found the people much distracted, for at certain seasons of the year, a monster would appear, with a dragon's body and with 7 heads, intent on slaying everyone in sight. So Mr. Greatheart straightway went to meet it. And the beast at first was very rampant, and looked upon its enemy with disdain. But he then so belabored it that he forced it to retreat, and later on, they said, it died of its wounds. After that, our pilgrims had no trouble from the townsfolk. Now, as they went upon their way, they came to the same stile which led to Doubting Castle. Here, Mr. Greatheart stopped to consider what must be done. Have I not been commanded, he said, to fight the good fight? And with whom should I fight if not with Giant Despair? So who will go with me? We will, shouted Christiana's sons. And though their mother would be anxious, she still let them go. Now Giant Despair, because he was a giant, thought no one could overcome him. So after receiving the challenge, he roared, Who and what is this Mr. Greatheart, that he thinks he can molest me, I who have made a conquest of angels? And he came out of his castle, carrying a great club in his hand. But the boys beset him behind and before, like David of old, with slings and stones, and they brought him to the ground. The giant struggled hard and was very loth to die. He had, as they say, as many lives as a cat, but Greatheart was his death, and severed the head from his shoulders. Diffidence, the giantess, who was also cut down, and they buried them both under a heap of stones. So they fell to demolishing Doubting Castle, a task which took them 7 days, and there they found Mr. Despondency, almost starved to death and much afraid, his daughter. These 2 they saved alive, but you would marvel to have seen how full of dead men's bones the castle was. To celebrate their victory over so dangerous an enemy, Christiana played the viol, and Mercy played the lute. And the boys all danced, and Mr. Greatheart too. I promise you, they footed it well, and were jocund and merry. As to Mr. Despondency, he was for feeding rather than dancing, so Christiana gave him good food to eat. And in a while the old gentleman came to himself, and was revived. As they continued on their way, there stood before them a man with his sword drawn, and his face all bloody. His name, he said, was Valiant for Truth, and he had lately been set upon by 3 villains and vanquished them. Here are great odds, 3 against 1, cried Greatheart. It is true, replied Valiant for Truth, but little or more are nothing to him that has the truth on his side. You have done well, said Greatheart. Then they took him and washed his wounds, and Mr. Greatheart was delighted in him, for he had found a man after his own heart, and because there were in his party them that were feeble and weak. So they all went on together, now a company of 10, Mr. Greatheart in lead, while Valiant for Truth was last in the line, in case some fiend or giant should attack them in the rear, and so do mischief. Now on all this road there wasn't a single inn to refresh the feebler sort, and the way was deep in mud and slabbiness. Some of the children lost their shoes, and loud was the grunting and the puffing and the sighing. To make things worse, night fell, but prudently their guide had brought a map, showing all the roads to the celestial city. He now struck a light, for he never went without his tinderbox, and saw that they must make a right turn. Otherwise, they might have all been sucked under in the mud, placed there on purpose by the devil to destroy them. So they arrived in Belua, where there was an inn at last, and there came a post from the celestial city, inquiring after Christiana, the wife of Christian the pilgrim. He had summons from his prince for her to appear before him within 10 days. Now the river, which all pilgrims have to cross, had at that point its ebbings and its flowings. For some of it overflowed its banks, for others it was dry. So Christiana, having said farewell to all her family and friends, entered the water. To her relief, it was quite shallow, and the last words she was heard to say were, "I come, O Lord, I come." As to her children, says John Bunyan in his dream, I didn't wait to see them cross. They stayed with Mercy and with Mr. Greatheart till their time was come. But a summons had arrived by the same post for Mr. Valiant for Truth. Calling to his friends, he said, "My sword I give to him that I shall succeed me, and my courage to him that I can get it. My scars I carry with me as my witness that I have fought the Lord's battles." As he entered the river, he said again, "Death, where is thy sting?" And as he went down deeper, he said, "Grave, where is thy victory?" So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side. Okay, so that is the end of our story. Two things. The first one, when we read chapter 8, the biblical truth in chapter 8, and it's kind of something I think that is shown throughout the book, is that Christ is the only way to heaven. And you keep seeing Christian throughout the book. He would go off the path and come back. But as long as he was keeping his eyes on Christ and where he was going, he was able to get back on that path. And the second thing that really shines a lot in Christiana's story is the fellowship. That fellowship helps Christians. And you see that she's got help throughout with her and her children, and how that makes her trip easier to the celestial city. But also, if you look back in the book and you see Christian's companions as he went along, how they helped him, or maybe it was Christian helping them, but they were able to help each other to stay on the path and keep focused on Jesus, since, again, Christ is the only way to heaven. I hope you enjoyed the book. Don't forget to do the questions, and we'll have a little writing project to do on this as well.